Behind the Game. This is a sports show, but it's really not about sports. At least it's not about the action that takes place on the field, the court, or the ice. It's really about what happens behind the scenes and the influential people, the owners, the agents, the administrators, the promoters who help shape the way that we watch and enjoy sports. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Game. I'm Patrick Klinger.
I'm Bill Robertson. Our special guest today is a good friend of both Patrick's and myself, a former Major League umpire, public speaker, and entrepreneur, Mr. Tim Tschida. Tim, welcome to Behind the Game.
Great to be here with you guys. It's been a long time since I've seen either one of you, so it's not just a TV show, it's a reunion.
Yes, it is. Great to have you with us today,
Thank you.
Tim.
Thank you.
You know, Tim, as we tape this first show in October, Major League Baseball's playoffs are taking place. You were a former Major League Baseball umpire for 26 years. You're watching the games, I'm sure, to some degree. Do you miss being part of the action right now?
I think you always miss the action. That never goes away. I miss the guys, the camaraderie with the guys, the locker room, and the action on the field. But when the first question people ask me is, "Do you miss it overall?" I said, "Not really. I don't miss the traveling at all." And commercial travel today is so cumbersome compared to what it was when I first started. And the scrutiny that the umpires are under nowadays is pretty strong. And with social media being what it is, there are, as far as I'm concerned, I think it creates security issues for the guys themselves and their families. Things can get a little out of hand sometimes if you have a controversial call against a particular team, and it usually comes as a result of someone had a big bet on the game or something along those lines that can bring undesirable results and things like that. No, I've experienced what it's like to be guarded because I had one time missed a play in a league championship series, and you have to check out of your hotel and check into another hotel under an assumed name, and they provide security for you because you're at risk. You're at risk not just for maybe physical harm or threats or just something as simple as a local shock jock radio guy in the morning calling you at your hotel at 7 o'clock to blast you over the air or do whatever. All those things are out there now, and so from that standpoint, I'm glad. You never want to wish yourself to be older, but I'm glad my years are behind me.
Okay.
Tim, you talk about the pressure of being a Major League Baseball umpire, and you did 3 World Series and I think 15 divisional series, a couple of All-Star games.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you had to take your game up a notch when you were in a big series?
Not really, because when I broke in with a guy named Rich Garcia, and Richie taught me early on that you don't work one game more intense than another. You should be out there applying the same philosophy and the same effort, no matter if you've got 2 teams combined that are 30 games out in the middle of September, or if you're on the big stage in the middle of October. He says, because he always said there's never a good time to practice a bad habit. He says, and if you get in the habit of thinking you can turn it on and turn it off whenever you feel like it, you're only hurting yourself. You have to treat every single play all season long the same. And the comparison we always use was if you watch professional golfers, they very rarely walk up and tap that little half 6-inch putt in with their right hand. They stand over the putt, they square up, and they mechanically do what they always do, because umpiring is all about repetition, particularly in baseball. And if you have to develop good habits, and you will automatically repeat those habits, and it creates muscle memory, it creates philosophy that you apply at all times. But is there more pressure? Of course there is. There's more exposure, and I think I'd be lying if I said you don't feel that, but you shouldn't apply that philosophy as to what type of effort you apply every time you go out there. It should be the same.
I would also think that in a playoff series, World Series, when you have additional umpires down the lines, that it would be a little bit easier, but that could cause some issues as well, because you're used to having 4 umpires at a big league level. You used to probably work solo by yourself,
right,
and with 2 umpires when you got up into the business. And now you have 6 umpires,
right,
and we saw that just the other night with the Astros and Red Sox with the Mookie Betts play in the outfield. That could have been, and maybe it still is, very hard for the Astro fans. Red Sox fans are happy, but when I looked at that, I go, they had an umpire out there. He got out there, Joe West. He must have seen something to be able to at least make that call, and then they had to go look at it, obviously, on the replay. So it's all changed.
Yes, it has, and in all the special events that I ever worked, I added it up one time. I think I worked a foul line, either left field or right field, like 10 games total in my entire career, of which I umpired over 3,500 games. So 10 games on the foul line is, it's hard to get good at it. You don't get really comfortable at it. And you're seeing the game from a whole different perspective, because when the ball's hit, if you're in the outfield, you have to wait till the ball gets to you and passes you before you can turn with it. Because if you're at first base and I'm in right field, you can turn right away because the ball's past you. I have to wait because I have to avoid, first of all, you're positioned in that area where pop flies are first baseman, second baseman, right fielder converging. So you have to get out of the way, and the first base umpire has to cover you, because if you have to abandon the foul line just to avoid being an obstruction, then you have to do that in concert with one another. And there's no rehearsal for that. There's no practicing that. You just have to, you just got to work together on it. But now in the West situation here, first of all, I think he got to play right. I think it's a difficult call, and it's one of those plays where replay didn't provide the best possible camera angle, and that will, let's come back to that. You asked me something about that later on. So they had to go with what they had. Joe called what he saw. He went in to the replay. He followed the protocol as is dictated by MLB, and the replay officials in New York said they confirmed it. Now there's some talk out there that, all right, they actually said that we can't see anything different than what you saw. So are they saying that they confirmed it or didn't? But it's one of those plays that if you look at it, depending on who you are, you'll see whatever you want to see. If you're a Houston fan, you're going to say, no, it's a home run. If you're a Boston fan, you're going to say, well, he clearly would have caught it, which has always been an issue with fan interference. And Major League Baseball is the only sport that actually has a rule that is under the heading of spectator interference. There's no such thing in the NHL. There's no such thing in the NBA, and there's no such thing in the NFL. Why? Well, because the fans aren't that close to the field. And Major League Baseball is also the only sport where every field is different. They are all the same when it comes to 90-foot bases and 60 feet 6 inches, and that there ends the similarities. Some parks have a lot of foul ground, some parks have a little foul ground, some places have high fences, low fences, tough corners. There's all these, and the ballpark in Houston, God bless them all, but that is probably the most gimmick-laden ballpark out there. They really overdid it when they built that park. Those Crawford boxes out in left field. I mean, you saw the home run that Verlander gave up was a pop fly, and it was a 3-run home run that ended, not only sealed the game, it sealed the series. And the fans in right field have complete access to the right fielder. They can reach over anywhere. And then there's specifics that need to be applied universally to all ballparks in Major League Baseball when it comes to setting up cameras for replays and certain guidelines that they can have on their outfield fences. But Houston in particular, from foul pole to foul pole, is what we call an umpire's nightmare, because there's a trick spot up there the whole way you look around, and it's, you got this much time to decide. And as we saw, replay was really unable to assist in that particular case. All it was that, you could look at it and go, well, we're going to stick with that call because there's nothing there to change it.
Tim, you were in the big leagues by the time you were in your early to mid 20s. You were younger than a lot of the players that you were umping for.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? That must have been almost surreal to be so young and be in such a responsible position.
It was. I was very, very fortunate, as I stated earlier about my first real crew chief was Rich Garcia, and he was a big fan of mine, and he instilled a lot of the qualities that I took to the very last day that I umpired, about hustling and one thing he told me was he says, when you're young, that's when you make your impressions in this business, he says, because they're going to remember you. So, if you have to demonstrate that you are there to work, that you care about doing a good job, that you hustle all the time, and if you develop those qualities, they will come to respect you very quickly. And now, once you establish that, then you have to spend the rest of your career maintaining that. And and then going on further, fast forward, 15 years, and I'm a crew chief. Some of the guys that worked on my crew had said, it's really nice working on your crew. And I said, well, why is that? I said, well, because we walk on the field and they leave us alone. And I said, well, don't give me all the credit for that. I said, because I learned that from Richie. And Richie taught me the same thing. So I said, when I walk on the field and you walk with me, they know that they're going to get a good effort. They'll cut you slack. They'll accept mistakes. They'll accept errors on the part of us. But they won't accept lackluster effort or disinterest or being above everybody and thinking you're better and more important than anything else. You have to show humility. You have to show sincerity. And fortunately, that was instilled into me by the best. And I tried to pass that along to everybody that worked with me. And it's a pretty simple philosophy, and it's not exclusive to umpire. It's part of every profession in the world. It's no matter what you do for a living, you have to establish those things, and you will be successful. And but yeah, going back to the original question about being young, yes, it was a little intimidating. All of a sudden I'm behind the plate and there's Rod Carew up to hit, and I have a foul ball that I got at Met Stadium that Rod Carew hit, back when I was a kid, and we used to all imitate his batting style, and there's Harmon Killebrew broadcasting the games and, things like that, and all these people you saw on television and you're standing next to them, The first time they yell at you, that's when you get over it. The novelty wears off pretty quickly, but it's there, and it's pretty darn exciting.
Well, I do remember seeing in your first year of umpiring, you were brought up from the minor leagues and you were doing a series in Anaheim, California with the Angels at the time. I can't remember who they were playing. And you came over after the game. I was with some friends and I was so proud to say, I went to high school with Timmy, and he's now, look, he's on the field umpiring. You did a great job that day. I think our viewers would love to know, though, you talk a little bit about being a crew chief. Mm-hmm. And in your younger days, you weren't the crew chief. But what is the responsibility of a crew chief? Because I don't really know all of it, other than you're really in charge when there's a problem.
Right. Well, yeah, the buck stops here when you're the crew chief. And but certain things you have to develop a camaraderie amongst your guys. The thing I used to insist upon is that we did something socially together at least once a week. I would let the guys do during the daytime, because we worked almost exclusively at night. I wasn't insistent upon having lunch together every day or anything like that, because some guys might be tired. If you say, hey, we're lunch at 12:30 tomorrow, a young kid, he may be exhausted. Because maybe he had the plate last night and he didn't fall asleep and he might need to catch up on some sleep, or they've just got other things they need to do. And I say, you're free. You're on your own. We'll do our together time in the locker room, and then if we go out for an adult beverage after the game, okay, but we're going to go to dinner at least once a week. And if your family's in town, your family comes along. Things like that. That's the off the field stuff. The in locker room things are, you have to. I always said that, and I learned this from Richie, that the crew chief dictated. Or the plate umpire, excuse me. The plate umpire that particular day, you had to leave him alone, because you don't want to distract him. And some guys that are working third base, they might be a little loud in the locker room that day or whatever, and the other guy's over there, and he's got Nolan Ryan going against Charlie Huff tonight or something. Have respect for him and keep the room, calm. Don't be all into yourself. You've got to realize that every fourth day it's going to be your turn. And we always used to say we had this line about if you had the plate that day, you're going to the electric chair, and if you had third base that day, you just got out of jail, that kind of thing. And it was you just respect each other along those lines. That it takes an effort on all four of our parts, and it's not just about you. And then on the field, of course, you as a leader, you never ask anyone on the crew to do something that you aren't willing to do yourself. So, and this goes back to what I said earlier about guys working on my crew, and what they said was, well, I'm still 50 years old, and when the balls hit the right field and it's my responsibility, I run out there. That's what we get paid to do. And they see me, heck, Buck Showalter, I've known him since he played in the Florida State League. They see you over and over again for your whole career. And, an average player career is less than 5 years. So then some of them go into broadcasting, they go into coaching, and they remember me from A-ball. They remember me from their rookie year as a player, my rookie year as an umpire, and they look out 20 years later, and you're doing things the same way. And that's why they leave you alone. They respect you. But if they see that you've developed an attitude now that you don't maybe have to work as hard, or you don't have to hustle because you've been there that long, trust me, they'll let you know about it. So you have to instill those qualities into your crew members to never, ever take anything for granted out there. And again, especially, if you're working a big series, you better not need to be pumped up for that. That should come on its own. The one you need to kind of dig down on is, like I mentioned earlier, the one in September where two teams are totally eliminated. But you got to realize those two managers, they're fighting for their jobs, and they're trying to find a way, any way possible, to get their guys to go out and play hard, even though the games are relatively meaningless. So don't let them. I'm telling my umpires now, don't let them look out there and see you taking it easy, because they'll remember that, and they'll hold it against you somewhere along the line. They need to see you hustling, so they can tell their players, because when they're playing meaningless games, they have nothing else to do but watch what you do, and you better work hard, because you'll pay for it somewhere along the line if you don't. And pretty much, that's crew chief in a nutshell. And then if things go bad, you're going to get the heat. It's that simple, and so you better be prepared for it.
Tim, you worked with some managers who are really characters. It's Sparky Anderson. You had the Earl Weavers. You probably had maybe Tommy Lasorda at some point. Billy Martin.
Billy Martin.
Gene
Mock, Earl Weaver.
Sure.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of your favorite managers to deal with, and maybe some of those that were particularly challenging.
Okay. Well, the first one that always comes to mind is that Tom Kelly was a very, very good manager to umpire for. He had respect for us, and he also was a guy that, his philosophy was simple. He always felt that his team had a better chance to win if he stayed in the game. So he never saw an advantage to getting ejected. And Jim Leland was the same way in that regard. They both said, if you have to resort to getting ejected to try to get your guys to play hard, you're in the wrong business, because that's foolish. So Tom was very, very fair. If he came out on you on a play, you thought twice about it. Then you start thinking, I think I might have missed that one, because he'll cut you the benefit of the doubt more often than not. And he also believed that there were certain umpires that would hold it against him if he did argue, which early on in my career that's probably was true from some guys, not from me. I didn't feel like that was necessary, but. So from the high end, he's always gotten straight A's. Earl Weaver and Billy Martin were probably the hardest and both, God rest both their souls. They're not here to defend themselves, so I'm not going to get too far in depth. But basically, in their mind, was umpires were just necessary evils. And if Billy would try especially hard, I should say, to try to intimidate a young umpire. And he managed through intimidation, and that's why he was successful when he had young teams, because he could scare those guys into playing. He didn't do that well with veteran teams because they just didn't respond to the yelling and the screaming. Well, Billy Martin challenged everybody he ever met the first time he met him, and if you punched him back, he had respect for you. And so I got off on the right foot with him early, and he challenged me right away, and I ended up ejecting him the first time I ever saw him. And he left me alone the rest of my career. Gene Mauch was tough but fair. Gene, again, he only came out if he felt he had a legitimate gripe. He was smart. He knew the rules very, very well, but he also really respected hard work. And if you were, Bill had a pleasure of crossing paths with Gene more than once through the Angels organization, and the best description I ever heard of him came from the late Mike Augustine, who was a beat writer for the Twins when Gene was managing here. He said, Gene Mauch, baseball was his life, and he knew what everybody's job was, from bat boy to parking lot attendant to traveling secretary to player to utility player to umpire to beat writer to broadcaster. And if you were good at your job, and if you worked hard at being good at your job, he respected you and he left you alone. If you were a smart aleck, if you were fresh and liked yourself a little bit too much, he would bury you. I mean, bury you. And but you also have to go back in those days with Weaver, Martin, Dick Williams. They didn't have 3-year deals. They were usually 1-year contracts for those guys, so their jobs were never guaranteed. And if you cross paths with those guys off the field, they were great. They were great socially, and I'm not talking about having a bunch of drinks together or anything. If you played in a celebrity tournament somewhere and you'd see each other, you were part of the family. But when the game started, you were the enemy, and that's just the way it was. Today it's a lot different. Today it's a lot more amicable, and it's a lot more. With replay, there's less arguments. There's nothing to argue anymore other than balls and strikes, which, if you look back at this season, I'm sure it's like 99% of all ejections are the result of ball strike decisions, because it's the only thing they can yell about. Replay, they've got replay to review any close play on the bases, so that element is gone. But and then when I get asked this question specifically a lot, who's the toughest guy to deal with ever? Well, the toughest guy to deal with is the guy that's lost 10 straight, because their job's on the line. They're feeling the heat, and especially in today's game where it's so quick. You can go from manager of the year to being fired the next year. It's just, what have you done for me lately? It's very, very corporate now, and somebody's always going to get blamed. If things don't go right, somebody is getting the blame. And is it fair? No. Is it right? No. But is it true? Yes, it is. It's very true.
Well, your story, your history, having known you for many years, attending Cretin High School, you were umpiring in the Big Ten with another St. Paul legend, Bill Peterson, when you were in high school, which is unheard of these days, under the auspices of Dick Siebert, the chief, who was the longtime head coach at the University of Minnesota. I want to take you back a little bit, because St. Paul has developed 3 Hall of Famers to date, and other great baseball players, not just them.
Right.
But 3 are in the Hall of Fame: Dave Winfield, Paul Molitor, and Jack Morris. And you had time to spend with all of them. I would think that because of our regional and local audience today, maybe you have a snippet on 1 or 2 of them that everybody would love to hear.
Well, the first crossing I had was with Jack. Jack played with my older brother in Babe Ruth baseball, and I was a bat boy on a team the Babe Ruth team that went to the state tournament, and Jack was on that team. And I grew up at Edgecombe Playground, so I watched him play and his brother Tommy play from the time they were, 10, 11 years old. And, fast forward a little bit, and it was 84, and I was in my first Major League spring training in Lakeland, Florida, where the Tigers were training. And I'm working home plate, and Jack is pitching. And after about 2 hitters, and when you're working with nobody on base and there's like a ground ball hit, I know what it was. It was I had to switch balls with him. The ball got scuffed or something. And then I took my mask off, and he looked at me. He says, "What the heck are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to get a job. That's what I'm trying to do." I said, "So please try not to be your normal charming self, all right? Have a little sympathy for me." And then later on, when I did get hired, my first trip ever into Milwaukee, having the Brewers, Paul Mahler, after the game, called the locker room and said, "Congratulations, welcome to the big leagues," and all that. And I have to back up Jack's situation. My first game that I was called up to was at Old Comiskey Park, and the Tigers were playing there, and I was at second base. And Jack was pitching that night, and his parents were at the game. And following the game, there were the other umpires got a bottle of champagne for me to celebrate my first big league game, and there's a knock on the door, and this clubhouse guy answers. He says, "Tim, you've got somebody here who wants to say hello." I said, "Okay." So I walk over to the door, and it's Jack and Donna Morris, or Arvid and Donna Morris, Jack's parents. And because I've known them since I was a little boy as well, and they couldn't have been happier for me, and it was a very touching moment, And then David, I finally crossed paths with him when he was still with the Yankees, and then from there he went to the Angels. I believe he was with the Angels briefly, and then
Correct.
he went to
Toronto
and Minnesota, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and first of all, they're Hall of Fame players, so they don't have to lean on umpires. They don't need umpires. They don't complain about umpiring because they're above that. They're we get most of our complaints from the guy that's fighting for that 25th spot on the roster. They were superstars, but they were also. I always say to people that first of all, if Jack Morris had pitched in the National League, he would have won well over 300 games, and you would have been able to see what an athlete he was because he could hit, and I would have loved to have seen him hit because he was not just a pitcher; he was an athlete in all sports, and he had a lot of years on teams that weren't that good, similar to Bert Blyleven. But when he was with a good team, he was successful, and same thing was true with Jack, and he would have been able to pitch deeper into games, or he would have had more bullpen help, or either way, but he had some years, and finally when the Tigers got Willie Hernandez, and they had a much better team, he got more wins, and he would have, he had a lot of close losses in his career, but. Growing up in St. Paul, and as you said, Billy, the number of players who were drafted and signed and played professionally is very, very high. In addition to guys that played Division I, those are good players. You can't. They don't give those uniforms away. You have to be good, and the coaching that came through St. Paul all started with Dick Siebert at the U. He ran a coaches clinic. Everybody in St. Paul coached the game the same way. Everybody learned how to play the right way.
Fantastic. Hey, Tim, our time has come to an end. Quick half an hour. I listen to your stories all day. You're a fantastic storyteller. So thank you so much for joining us on Behind the Game today.
Well, we can do it anytime you guys want, because we're talking about a subject that I love dearly, and I know you guys do too.
Great.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
Tim.
Bet.
And thank you for watching Behind the Game.